General Yunho commanded the largest battle fleet in Imperial history. 3,000 warships filled the space around his flagship, each one carrying enough firepower to burn entire continents. The assembled armada could destroy star systems, crack planets in half, and reduce whole civilizations to cosmic dust. In 2,000 years of Imperial expansion, no force this massive had ever been needed. The order from Empress Nari herself had been crystal clear. The humans in the Kepler system had revealed themselves as a threat to Imperial authority. They claimed to have been manipulating Imperial decisions for centuries, guiding the Empire like children who needed constant supervision. Such arrogance could not be tolerated. The Empire would demonstrate once and for all who truly ruled the galaxy, but as the fleet moved into attack formation, something felt wrong. The usual pre-battle tension that filled every ship before combat was missing instead, replaced by an odd sense of uncertainty. Yunho had led Imperial fleets against rebellious worlds dozens of times. The pattern was always the same. Enemy forces would scramble to defensive positions. Civilians would flee in panic, and desperate communications would flood space begging for mercy. The Kepler system showed none of these signs. Instead, human ships continued their regular traffic patterns, moving cargo and passengers as if the largest military force in galactic history was not preparing to attack them. Orbital stations maintained their normal operations. Children played in parks visible through long-range scanners while adults went about their daily work. Most disturbing of all, the humans had not raised a single defensive shield. They had not powered up weapons, systems. They had not called their ships back to protective formations. They acted like 3,000 Imperial warships posed no more threat than a flock of harmless birds. Admiral Jungwoo commanded the advanced strike force, and his reports made Yunho increasingly nervous human vessels were actually approaching Imperial ships not to attack, but to offer assistance. Traffic control messages suggested efficient flight paths through the system. Merchant ships broadcast offers to sell supplies to Imperial crews who might be tired after their long journey. When Yunho ordered his fleet to assume battle formation, the humans responded with helpful advice. They pointed out that the Imperial ships were bunching up in ways that would interfere with each other, firing solutions. They suggested alternative arrangements that would give the Imperial fleet better tactical coverage. They even offered to move their own civilian traffic to safer areas so it would not get in the way during the coming battle. The strangest part was that all their suggestions were actually helpful. Imperial formation doctrine taught standard attack patterns that had worked for centuries, but the human recommendations improved on those patterns in ways that made perfect sense. Yunho found himself unconsciously following their advice before he realized what he was doing. The attack order came at exactly noon, Imperial Standard Time. Yunho opened fleet communications and gave the command that would begin the destruction of the Kepler system. All ships were to open fire simultaneously, targeting major population centers, industrial facilities, and military installations. The humans would learn what happened when anyone dared to challenge Imperial supremacy. But when he pressed the firing command, nothing happened. Weapon systems on his flagship simply refused to activate control panels that should have lit up with targeting data remained. Dark crews reported that their weapon controls were not responding. To input, the massive plasma cannons that could vaporize cities sat silent and cold. Across the fleet, the same reports came flooding in. 3,000 warships had suddenly become 3,000 very expensive pieces of space junk. Every weapon system in the Imperial Armada had simply stopped working, not damaged or destroyed, but politely declining to function. Then the messages began appearing on every screen in the fleet communications displays that should have shown tactical data, instead showed cheerful notes. The weapon systems are temporarily unavailable for your safety and the safety of others. Please stand by while we resolve this technical difficulty. Navigation computers stopped showing attack vectors and started suggesting scenic tours of the Kepler system. Notable attractions include the crystal gardens of the third moon and the spectacular aurora displays around the gas giant. Entertainment programs replaced military communications as ship systems began playing soothing music instead of carrying battle orders. Yunho watched in growing horror as his magnificent war fleet was transformed into the galaxy's largest tourist group. His weapons officers frantically tried to regain control of their systems, while his engineering crews searched for signs of sabotage or electronic interference. But every diagnostic showed the same result. The weapons were not broken. They were simply choosing not to work. The demonstration reached its peak when every Imperial ship in the galaxy, not just the attack fleet but every vessel anywhere in Imperial space, simultaneously received the same data packet. Detailed technical manuals for every piece of Imperial technology appeared on ship computers everywhere. But these were not the simplified operational guides that Imperial crews used. These were complete theoretical frameworks showing how faster-than-light travel actually worked, why energy shields could block some attacks but not others, and what principles made artificial gravity possible. The technology that formed the backbone of Imperial civilization was suddenly laid bare in all its borrowed and half-understood complexity. Yunho realized with growing terror that the humans were not just demonstrating superior technology. They were showing the Empire that every ship, every weapon, every critical system existed only because these humans allowed it to exist. Imperial engineers had been using technologies they did not truly understand, stolen from conquered species, and cobbled together into working systems. The humans could have disabled every Imperial vessel in the galaxy at any moment. They possessed not just superior knowledge, but complete understanding of Imperial systems down to the molecular level. The Empire, mighty military machine, was like a child toy that worked only because the adults had not yet decided to take it away. A direct communication came to Yunho flagship from the Kepler system. Dongwu appeared on the main screen, his expression sad but not angry. General Yunho, we are disappointed but not surprised. The Empire chose force when we offered cooperation. This demonstration was necessary to show you the truth about your situation. Your ships are not damaged and your crews are not harmed. Dongwu continued. We have simply reminded your technology of its true nature. Imperial science has always depended on discoveries made by others. You use tools you do not understand, following instructions rather than comprehending principles around. The Imperial fleet space began to shimmer and change. Human vessels that had seemed small and insignificant revealed themselves as something far more advanced. What the Imperial sensors had read as simple cargo ships were actually constructs that operated on physical laws the Empire had never discovered. The humans were not hiding their true capabilities behind tricks or deception. They had been politely allowing the Empire to see only what Imperial science was capable of understanding. Now, they lifted that gentle limitation and showed themselves as they truly were. Your Empire has potential, Dongwu said, as reality rearranged itself around the helpless Imperial fleet. But it has been growing in the wrong direction, like a plant reaching for artificial light instead of the sun. We would like to help you find a better path, but the choice must be yours. The final message was broadcast to every Imperial ship everywhere. Not just the attack fleet, but every vessel in the entire Empire. We are not your enemies, General Yunho. We are your teachers, and we think you are finally ready for the next lesson. The question is whether you are ready to learn in the space around Kepler. 442-3,000 Imperial warships hung motionless there, weapons useless, their technology revealed as borrowed tools in the hands of children. The Empire had come to demonstrate their power, and instead discovered they had never possessed any power at all. Captain Minho had broken into the most secure systems in the galaxy. He had cracked military codes that were supposed to be unbreakable. He had infiltrated resistance networks and uncovered hidden weapons programs that threatened Imperial security. 20 years of intelligence work had taught him that every civilization had secrets, and every secret could be discovered with enough patience and skill. But the Kepler archives were different. They did not fight his attempts to access them. Instead, they seemed to welcome his intrusion, offering him information faster than he could process it. File after file opened at his touch, revealing data that should have taken months to steal. The humans were not trying to hide their secrets. They were eager to share them. The first discovery made his blood run cold. These beings were not just similar to humans, they were humans. The same species that Imperial scouts had catalogued 3 centuries ago as primitive and backward. The same people whose homeworld had gone mysteriously silent, just as the Empire was planning to add them to their collection of conquered races. But these were not the simple farmers and craftsmen that Imperial records described. These humans had built a civilization that operated on principles Minho could barely understand. Their technology did not just surpass Imperial capabilities. It approached problems from directions that Imperial science had never considered, where the Empire built massive ships to project power across space. The humans had learned to fold space itself, making distance meaningless. Where Imperial fleets needed months to travel between star systems, human vessels could cross the galaxy in days by riding currents of bent spacetime that existed only when they needed them. Where the Empire conquered planets to strip away their resources, these humans had learned to ask planets for cooperation. Worlds in the Kepler system actually wanted to share their minerals and energy. The planets themselves had become partners in human civilization, offering their bounty in exchange for care and protection. The historical records were even more disturbing. The humans had detailed files on every Imperial conquest going back to the very founding of the Empire. They knew about species that had been completely wiped from official records. Languages that the Empire thought they had erased forever still lived in human archives. Cultures that Imperial historians claimed never existed were preserved in perfect detail. But they had not just been watching. They had been acting. Mysterious technical failures that had saved entire worlds from Imperial conquest could be traced back to subtle human interference. Supply line disruptions that had ended. Wars before they could begin had been caused by human agents working behind the scenes. Diplomatic incidents that had redirected Imperial expansion away from certain systems were the result of careful human manipulation. Minho found files showing human operatives working within the Empire itself. They had people in Imperial intelligence in the military command structure, even in the Imperial Council chambers. The Empire thought they were making their own decisions, but humans had been quietly influencing Imperial policy for generations. The most shocking discovery came when he accessed their real-time monitoring systems. The humans were tracking every Imperial ship in the galaxy, every military base, every colonial outpost, every secret research facility glowed on their displays like stars in the night. They knew where every Imperial citizen lived, what every Imperial officer was doing, and how every Imperial system functioned. They had maps of Imperial space that were more accurate than the Empire-owned charts. They had technical specifications for Imperial technology that were more detailed than the original design documents. They had psychological profiles of Imperial leaders that revealed thoughts and motivations those leaders themselves did not understand. But perhaps most disturbing of all, they had contingency plans. Plans for what to do if the Empire attacked specific worlds. Plans for how to evacuate entire species before Imperial fleets could reach them. Plans for disabling Imperial technology if the Empire became too dangerous to ignore. The humans had been preparing for every possible Imperial action for centuries. When Minho confronted Dongwu with his discoveries, the human leader showed no surprise or concern. Instead, he smiled with the same gentle expression that seemed to be the default for all humans in the Kepler system. "We wondered when you would find those files," Dongwu said calmly. "Your intelligence training is quite good, Captain, though. We have been leaving you easier paths to follow than you probably realize." "How long?" Minho demanded. "How long have you been manipulating us?" Dongwu considered the question for a moment, as if trying to decide how much truth to share. "Since the beginning," he said finally. "The Empire has never made a major decision without human input. You think you have been conquering the galaxy, but you have been following paths we prepared for you." The statement hit Minho like a physical blow. Every Imperial victory, every successful conquest, every expansion of Imperial territory had been guided by human influence. The mighty empire that ruled 3,000 star systems existed only because these humans had allowed it to exist. "Why?" Minho asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why let us conquer so many worlds? Why let us destroy so many civilizations?" Dongwu's expression grew sad. "Because you needed to learn, and learning requires experience. The Empire has been growing, but growing in the wrong direction. We have been waiting for you to reach the point where you were ready to choose a better path." He led Minho to a vast chamber filled with holographic displays showing the galaxy in real time. Every star system appeared as a point of light with streams of data flowing between them. The Empire-controlled systems glowed red while free worlds showed as blue or green, but scattered throughout the display were golden points that pulsed with gentle light. Those are the worlds we have been protecting. Dongwu explained species that were scheduled for imperial conquest but somehow avoided it. Civilizations that should have been destroyed, but found ways to survive. Wars that should have happened, but never quite began. Minho stared at the display and realized the truth. The galaxy was not under imperial control. It was under human protection. The Empire thought they were the dominant force, but they were just one part of a much larger system that these humans had been carefully managing. You could have stopped us at any time, he said. Yes, Dongwu agreed. But stopping you would not have taught you anything. You needed to see where the path of conquest leads to understand why cooperation works better. We have been protecting the galaxy from you while giving you time to grow into something better. The golden points on the display began to pulse faster, and Minho realized they were not just showing protected worlds. They were showing a network, a vast web of civilizations that had been quietly working together under human guidance while the Empire stomped around the galaxy, thinking they were in charge. The Empire has potential. Dongwu continued, but it has been growing like a cancer instead of like a garden. We would like to help you learn how to grow in ways that strengthen the galaxy instead of weakening it. Minho looked at the display showing the true state of the galaxy and felt everything he thought he knew crumble around him. The Empire was not the dominant power. They were not even an independent force. They were students in a classroom they had never realized they were attending, and their teachers had been patiently waiting for them to be ready for the next lesson. The question now, Dongwu said gently, is whether you are ready to graduate. Empress Nari stood alone in her throne room, staring out at the stars that had once seemed destined for imperial conquest. 50 years she had ruled the galaxy, expanding imperial territory beyond the wildest dreams of her ancestors. She had crushed rebellions that threatened imperial order, absorbed entire civilizations into the imperial system, and created an empire that spanned thousands of star systems across half the known galaxy. Now everything she had built, everything she had fought for, hung in the balance because of beings who looked like humans but possessed power that made imperial might seem like the tantrums of children. The reports from General Yunho fleet had shaken the very foundations of imperial confidence. 3,000 warships reduced to helpless observers, while their technology politely refused to follow orders. The human offer lay before her on her desk, written in simple words that carried the weight of galactic transformation. They would share their knowledge, freely help the Empire transition from conquest to cooperation, and guide imperial civilization toward a future where species worked together instead of serving imperial dominance. The benefits they described seemed almost too good to believe. Cities that grew themselves using living architecture, that adapted to the needs of inhabitants, transportation systems, that moved people and goods without pollution or waste, energy sources that provided unlimited power without depleting planets or burning out stars, medical knowledge that could extend life and eliminate suffering, scientific understanding that opened pathways to discoveries the Empire had never imagined. But the price for this knowledge was everything the Empire had been built upon. They asked that imperial expansion through conquest immediately cease. They wanted the Empire to begin the long, difficult process of healing the damage they had caused to conquered worlds. They demanded that subject species be given real choices about their participation in imperial civilization. The alternative was equally clear in its implications. The humans could disable every imperial system, free every conquered species, and reduce the mighty empire to a collection of isolated worlds. In a matter of days, they had demonstrated this capability beyond any possible doubt. Their weapons were not plasma cannons or missile arrays, but complete understanding of how imperial technology functioned. Around the imperial capital, signs of human influence were already becoming visible. Reports flooded in from across the empire about mysterious improvements happening on conquered worlds. Planets that had struggled under imperial resource extraction suddenly found their environments healing. Themselves, species that had been forced into labor camps discovered that their overseers had lost the ability to maintain control systems. Industrial facilities that had stripped wealth from subject worlds began producing goods that benefited local populations instead of enriching imperial citizens. Mining operations that had scarred entire continents started regenerating damaged landscapes. Trade routes that had funneled resources toward imperial core worlds shifted to distribute wealth more fairly among all participants. But perhaps most unsettling of all, imperial citizens themselves were beginning to question everything they had been taught about their civilization. Access to human historical records showed them what their empire had really cost the galaxy. They saw civilizations that had been wiped from existence to make room for imperial colonies, knowledge that had been lost when entire species were reduced to slavery, art and culture that had been destroyed because it did not fit imperial standards. Young imperial citizens were the first to embrace these revelations. They had grown up accepting imperial dominance as natural and necessary, but now they learned about alternatives that worked better. Universities across imperial space buzzed with discussions about cooperation instead of conquest. Students demanded courses in diplomatic solutions rather than military tactics. The older generation struggled more with the new reality. Imperial officers who had spent their careers conquering worlds found themselves questioning whether their actions had been necessary or just. Industrial leaders who had built fortunes from cheap labor on subject worlds discovered that fair wages and good working conditions actually produced better results. Religious leaders who had preached that imperial expansion was divinely ordained wrestled with evidence that showed other approaches to civilization that seemed more blessed. Politicians who had built careers on promises of ever greater imperial glory found their constituents asking why glory required so much suffering. Nari received daily reports from across the empire about the changes taking place. Some imperial governors reported that their subject populations were no longer afraid of rebellion because they had learned about peaceful paths to independence. Some military commanders found their troops unwilling to follow orders that involved harming civilians. Some industrial operations simply stopped functioning as workers chose cooperation over exploitation. The humans had not conquered the empire with force. They had conquered it with truth. They had shown imperial citizens what their civilization looked like from the outside, and most people did not like what they saw. The empire was transforming itself from within as its own people chose to follow human examples instead of imperial traditions. Standing in her throne room, Nari understood that regardless of her decision, the empire, as she had known it, was already ending. The humans had held up a mirror and forced imperial civilization to see itself clearly. Once that had happened, there was no way to go back to the comfortable lies that had sustained imperial expansion. She could fight this transformation and watch her empire tear itself apart as citizens chose sides between old imperial ways and new human approaches. She could refuse the human offer and see her civilization crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. She could try to maintain control through force and discover that her weapons would no longer obey orders to harm innocent people, or she could embrace the change and help guide her people towards something better. She could use her authority to smooth the transition from conquest to cooperation. She could work with human teachers to build new institutions that served all species instead of just imperial citizens. She could become part of the solution instead of remaining part of the problem. Choice was not really between accepting or rejecting the human offer. The choice was between leading change or being dragged along by it, between helping her people grow or watching them outgrow the need for her leadership entirely. Nari activated the communication system that connected her to every world in the empire. For the first time in imperial history, an empress would speak to all her subjects as equals, rather than as ruler to ruled citizens of the empire. She began her voice steady. Despite the magnitude of what she was about to say, we have learned that our understanding of the galaxy was incomplete. We believed that strength came from conquest, but we have discovered that true strength comes from cooperation. The age of imperial expansion through force is ending today. We will work with our new human teachers to build a civilization that lifts up all species instead of dominating them. This will not be easy, and it will not be quick, but it will be better than anything we have built before. Looking out at the stars that no longer seemed like targets for conquest but like neighbors waiting to be met. Nari made the decision that would transform galactic civilization. The Empire would learn to grow in new directions, guided by beings who had discovered that the greatest power came not from controlling others, but from helping them become everything they could be. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation was about to begin. Commander Jiho stared at the glowing screen in front of him. His eyes were wide with confusion and something that looked like fear. The numbers dancing across his display made no sense at all. 300 years ago, the mighty Galactic Empire had sent their best ships to explore the Kepler 442 system. The entire fleet had vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no wreckage, no clues about what happened. The Empire had marked the system as cursed space and forbidden any ships from going there, but now deep space sensors were screaming warnings that something big was happening in that forgotten corner of the galaxy. The readings showed massive cities sprawling across entire continents, energy signatures that burned brighter than small suns, transport networks that moved faster than anything the Empire had ever built. And strangest of all, the sensors detected millions of life forms living in what should have been empty dead space. Jiho had been commanding Imperial scout ships. For 15 years he had discovered new planets, mapped dangerous asteroid fields, and made first contact with dozens of alien species. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for readings like these. The Kepler system was not just alive, it was thriving in ways that seemed impossible. The Empire ruled over 3,000 star systems. Each conquered world followed the same pattern. The Imperial fleet would arrive, make demands, and either accept surrender or destroy all resistance it had, worked the same way for 2,000 years. Every alien species they met used similar technologies, built similar cities, and fell to Imperial might in predictable ways. The Empire had grown comfortable thinking they were the strongest force in the galaxy, standing on the bridge of his scout ship. Brave explorer Jiho watched his crew work frantically at their stations. His navigation officer, Daiho, kept shaking his head as he tried to plot a safe course through the system. The usual hyperspace lanes that connected star systems seemed twisted and changed around Kepler 442. It was as if space itself had been reshaped by forces the Empire did not understand. His science officer, Cuban, was running scan after scan, trying to make sense of the data streaming in from their long-range sensors. The energy readings kept climbing higher and higher until the instrument started showing error messages. The cities on the planet below were not just big, they were impossibly complex. Networks of light connected every structure in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The most disturbing part was how organized everything looked. Most civilizations the Empire encountered were messy, chaotic places where different groups fought for resources and power. But the Kepler system showed perfect harmony. Every ship moved in smooth, coordinated patterns. Every energy flow was balanced and controlled. It looked like a single massive organism, rather than millions of separate beings working together. Jiho ordered his ship to move closer to the main planet. As they approached, the readings became even more confusing. Orbital stations hung in space around the world, but they were not built like anything in Imperial databases. Instead of metal and plastic, these structures seemed to grow like living things. Their surfaces rippled with colors that shifted and changed as the scout ship watched. The planet itself defied everything Jiho knew about world building. Imperial colonies were built to show power. Massive towers reached toward the sky. Broadcasting arrays sent signals across space to remind everyone who was in charge. Military bases dotted every continent, ready to crush any sign of rebellion. But this world showed none of those things. The cities flowed across the landscape like rivers, following natural paths instead of straight imperial lines. Buildings seemed to emerge from the ground itself, rather than being built on top of it. Transport moved through the air without any visible ships or vehicles. It was as if the very atmosphere had been tamed to carry people and goods wherever they needed to go. When Jiho tried to use the ships, powerful sensors, to scan deeper into the civilization, something impossible happened. The beams simply stopped. They did not bounce back like hitting a shield. They did not get absorbed like hitting armor. They just ended as if they had never existed at all. The Empire had sensors that could see through any known defense system, but here they met barriers they could not even detect properly. His communications officer Wu Jin looked up from his station with worry written across his face. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the planet. The signal is coming through on Imperial. Standard frequencies using proper diplomatic codes. How do they know our communication protocols?" Jiho felt ice form in his stomach. Imperial communication systems were among the most closely guarded secrets in the galaxy. It took most alien species years of study just to learn basic Imperial language. These beings were not only using perfect Imperial standard, they were following diplomatic procedures that only high-ranking Imperial officers knew. "Put it on screen," he ordered. The main display flickered and showed a room that looked nothing like any alien environment Jiho had ever seen. Instead of the cold metal surfaces that marked advanced civilizations, or the primitive stone structures of backward worlds, this place seemed warm, and alive plants grew along the walls, providing soft green light. Water flowed in gentle streams across the floor, creating a sound like distant music. A figure stepped into view, and Jiho had to grip his command chair to keep from falling. The being looked almost exactly like a human. The same basic body shape, the same facial features, the same way of moving and standing. But humans were a primitive species that had vanished from the Outer Rim centuries ago. Their homeworld had gone silent and imperial. Scouts had found no trace of them anywhere in known space. The figure smiled with an expression that seemed genuinely friendly rather than fearful or hostile. Most aliens either cowered before imperial power or tried to hide their fear behind false bravery. This being showed neither reaction. Instead, there was something in his eyes that looked almost like amusement. "Welcome to the Kepler system," the figure said in perfect Imperial standard, his voice calm and confident. "We have been expecting you, Commander Jiho. I am Dongwu, and I speak for the people who live here. We know you have many questions, and we will be happy to provide answers." Jiho opened his mouth to deliver the standard Imperial first contact speech demanding immediate surrender and submission to Imperial authority. But the words died in his throat. This Dongwu had used his exact name and rank information that should have been impossible for anyone outside the Imperial fleet to know. "How do you know who I am?" Jiho managed to ask. Dongwu's smile grew wider. "We know many things about the Empire, Commander. Your ships, your people, your history. We have been watching from here for a very long time, and we think it is time we finally met." The transmission ended, leaving Jiho staring at a blank screen. His hands were shaking as he realized that everything the Empire thought they knew about the galaxy might be completely wrong. Somewhere in this forgotten system was a civilization that not only knew about Imperial power but seemed completely unimpressed by it. For the first time in his career, Commander Jiho was truly afraid. Ambassador Suman had done this dance 43 times before. She knew exactly how first contact with alien species was supposed to work. The Empire would arrive with overwhelming force, make their demands clear, and wait for the inevitable surrender. Most species took less than a day to realize they had no choice. Some tried to negotiate for better terms, but they all ended up the same way under Imperial rule. This time felt different from the moment her diplomatic vessel entered the Kepler system. Instead of the usual fearful silence or desperate attempts at communication, the beings who called themselves the Kepler Collective had sent her detailed navigation charts. The charts were not just accurate, they showed her things about space travel, that Imperial scientists had never discovered routes through hyperspace, that cut travel time in half-energy currents, that could boost ship speed without using fuel. Safe passages through asteroid fields that Imperial maps marked as impossible. To cross, even more disturbing was how casual their invitation had been. Most species either begged for mercy or tried to appear strong and defiant. These humans simply asked if she preferred to land at the main spaceport or if she would like to see their orbital facilities first. They treated the arrival of an Imperial diplomatic mission like neighbors welcoming friends for dinner. The massive Imperial dreadnought Eternal Glory followed behind her smaller ship. Its weapons could crack planets, and its shields could survive direct hits from stars. But the humans had not even bothered to power up defensive systems. Instead, they had sent helpful suggestions about where the dreadnought could park, so it would not interfere with local shipping. Traffic Captain Bongwan commanded the dreadnought, and his reports made Suman more nervous with each passing hour. His weapons officers reported that the human ships they could detect were not running with shields raised or weapons powered. They moved through space like civilians going about daily business, paying no attention to the most powerful warship in the Imperial fleet. Even stranger was how much the humans seemed to know about Imperial technology. When Bongwan tried to run tactical scans of human facilities, their computers politely informed him that such scans might damage sensitive equipment and suggested alternative sensor settings that would give him the information he needed without causing problems. The suggested settings worked perfectly and revealed details that Imperial sensors should not have been able to detect. Suman stood on the observation deck of her ship looking down at the planet that should have been another easy conquest. The surface was covered with cities that stretched from ocean to ocean, but they did not look like any urban centers she had ever seen. Instead of the towering monuments to power that marked every Imperial world, these cities flowed like living rivers. Buildings seemed to grow. From the earth itself, their walls covered with plants that provided light and filtered air. Transportation moved people and goods through tubes of flowing energy that required no visible infrastructure. Parks and gardens were woven throughout the urban areas so seamlessly that it was hard to tell where nature ended and civilization began. The spaceport where they landed was unlike anything in Imperial experience. Most alien spaceports were functional places designed to move ships and cargo as efficiently as possible. This one felt more like a vast garden that happened to have landing pads scattered throughout it. Ships touched down on platforms that rose from pools of clear water, while passengers walked along paths lined with flowering trees. What struck Suman most was how the humans moved. They showed none of the nervous energy that marked most species meeting Imperial representatives for the first time. They walked with confident, easy strides as if they owned not just their world, but the space around it. Children played in areas where Imperial protocol would have demanded security perimeters. Adults conducted business with relaxed efficiency that spoke of centuries without war or serious conflict. The human who met her at the landing pad introduced himself as Tai Hyung. He wore simple clothes that looked comfortable rather than formal, and his manner was so relaxed that Suman found herself wondering if he truly understood what was happening. An Imperial diplomatic mission was not a social visit, it was the first step toward conquest. "We are honored by your visit," Ambassador Taehyung said with what seemed like genuine warmth. "The Council is eager to meet with you and learn more about Imperial civilization. We have prepared quarters for your delegation and arranged tours of our facilities if you are interested." Suman had delivered the standard Imperial greeting hundreds of times. The Empire demands immediate acknowledgement of Imperial authority. All weapons systems must be powered down. All military forces must stand down. Planetary leadership must prepare for integration into Imperial civilization. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. But looking at Taehyung's friendly face and listening to his casual tone, the words felt wrong somehow. Instead, she heard herself saying, "Thank you for the warm welcome. We look forward to learning more about your people." The quarters they provided were more comfortable than anything Suman had experienced, even on luxury Imperial worlds. Instead of the cold efficiency that marked Imperial design, these rooms felt alive. Walls that adjusted their color based on mood, furniture that shaped itself to provide perfect comfort, windows that could show real views of the planet or display images from anywhere in the system. But it was the technology that truly unsettled her. The humans had provided her delegation with personal devices that connected them to what they called the collective network. The network contained more information than the entire Imperial database history files that went back thousands of years. Scientific data that solved problems Imperial researchers had worked on for centuries. Cultural records from species that the Empire thought they had completely conquered. Most disturbing of all were the files about the Empire itself. The humans had detailed records of every Imperial conquest going back to the founding of their civilization. They knew about battles that were classified above her security-level decisions made in closed Imperial Council sessions. Troop movements that were supposed to be secret. They had been watching and recording everything. When Suman demanded an explanation from Taehyung, he simply smiled and said, "We have always been curious about our neighbors. We find that understanding different approaches to civilization helps us improve our own methods. The next morning brought the formal meeting with the Kepler Council Sumin expected, to find herself facing alien leaders desperate to avoid conquest or trying to hide their fear behind false confidence. Instead, she met beings who treated imperial power like an interesting academic subject. Council leader Dongwu welcomed her with the same casual warmth she had received everywhere else. He listened politely as she explained. Imperial expansion policies nodded thoughtfully at descriptions of imperial military might and asked intelligent questions about imperial governance, methods, but there was something in his eyes that made Sumin deeply uncomfortable. It was not fear or anger or even curiosity. It was the look of someone examining a problem they had already solved. "We appreciate you taking the time to explain." Imperial methods, Dongwu said when she finished her presentation. "We have observed similar approaches among other species in the galaxy, and we understand the thinking behind them. But we wonder if you might be interested in seeing some alternative approaches to civilization." Before Sumin could ask what he meant, the walls of the council chamber became transparent, revealing a view that took her breath away. The planet stretched out below them, but now she could see it as it truly was. Every city, every transport, route, every energy flow was part of a single vast organism that pulsed with coordinated life. "This is what we have built here," Dongwu said quietly. "A civilization where every part supports every other part, where growth comes from cooperation rather than conquest. We think you might find it interesting." For the first time in her diplomatic career, Ambassador Sumin realized she was not delivering terms of surrender. She was receiving an education.